All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Pearl Ann Zalarny. I'm the voter or our newsletter editor and a board member of League. My pronouns are she and her. We're so pleased that you were all able to attend this kickoff of the League year. It's always special to us. And in particular, we want to welcome guests. For our guests, the League is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that has worked since the 1930s in Denver and 1920 nationally, of course, after women received the vote, to improve our systems of government and impact public policies through voter education and advocacy. Our briefings throughout the League year serve to educate our members, and we'll do that tonight, and also voters, and it often leads to advocacy as well. Before I hand this over to Kathy Yates to talk about upcoming events, some housekeeping notes. Please use the chat to ask questions during Councilperson Ortega's talk. For those that are new to chat, you can find it at the bottom of your screen. You can send to the whole group or to an individual. And for questions, send them to all. And don't forget to hit enter when you're sending it. I also want to say that it has turned, we've had many benefits of Zoom. And one of it is that the chat area is also a good place for sharing information with each other. So feel free to send messages to the whole group there. Our last speaker suggested turning on closed captioning, which seemed like a really excellent idea. You can do so by going to more at the bottom of the Zoom and selecting show subtitle, or by clicking on closed caption. So you might want to think about doing that. As we said, we've muted everyone to make sure we can hear our speaker clearly. We'll be doing questions along the way, and you can unmute for that, or I can present the questions, whichever you're more comfortable with. I think it will be a nice conversation with Councilperson Ortega. So we'll see how the questions go and if I can help in any way on that. All right, I'll hand it over to Kathy now, and we'll see you all a little bit later.
Thank you, Pearl Ann. I'm Kathy Yates, and I am the co-chair of programs. And it has been my delight to work with a group of very dedicated women to bring you really interesting programs during this year. We have posted our programs, and you'll be receiving in the voter the list of our programs for this year. They are the third Tuesday of every month, generally speaking. And of course, next month, October, is going to be the exception immediately. Our program briefing for October is going to be on October 5th. We'll discuss the Denver City ballot issues 301 and 302, which have to do with the Park Hill Golf Course and easements. And then Tuesday, October 12th at 5:30, all remaining ballot issues. Those programs, as well as tonight, are recorded, and you will be able to find them on YouTube, and we will post that on our website. It's my delight to introduce to you Cindy Sestrich, who has been working, a League member who has been working and contacting Councilwoman Ortega. It was her idea that this would be great timing, given Councilwoman Ortega's years of service, to hear from her and to gain her perspective on the relevant issues for us as Denver citizens. Cindy has been a member of the League for a number of years and is part of the Cheeseman Park unit. She's been involved in city government, and when we had a city government committee, she was a member of that, and she is very active in city government and making sure that people take action on relevant issues. She's had a long association with the city council, and she had the idea to have Councilwoman Ortega tonight. So I would like Cindy to now introduce us to Councilwoman Ortega. Thank you so much, Cindy, for your work on making this evening come together.
Unmute yourself, Cindy.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate your introduction. And Councilman Ortega has such a long history as a public servant that we thought this would be so appropriate this year to bring you in. Councilman Ortega was born in Raton, New Mexico. And then she and her family moved to Denver when she was 13. She attended Kepner Middle School, which is by Sloan's Lake, and today her and her daughter do walk around Sloan's Lake. So she's not far from where she began. And then Debbie did go to West High School. And after she graduated, she worked for former Lieutenant Governor George Brown and U.S. Senator Floyd Haskell. That's where her civic life began. Then, following her service there, she went to city council and worked for Councilman Sal Carpio in 1979. After Councilman Carpio left, she was elected as his successor in 1987. And she served during that stint until 2003. And that's when she was termed out. Then she continued her public service as executive director of the Denver Commission on the Homeless. So she has extensive background in affordable housing and homeless issues. She serves as a chair. She did serve as a chair at the Del Norte Neighborhood Development Corporation, which is a nonprofit for building affordable housing. She also serves on the board of directors of the Latino Safe House. Councilman Ortega has had many issues that we have followed as the league, and her accomplishments with protecting neighborhoods, protecting parkland, historic preservation, sporting facilities, and of course, the environmental facilities, cleaning up the Asarco, what do you call that? The Asarco contaminated site. I'm trying to think, the industrial waste site.
It was
And
a
then
lead
we
smelter.
also, thank you, the smelter. And then we also were working on the I-70 project. And this is where I began to really understand Councilman Ortega and her passions. And what she did on I-70 is just amazing, bringing in top lawyers to protect an underserved neighborhood that really has needed a lot of help through the years. They are very active. They are quite good, but Councilman Ortega helped them bring it to a level to where we couldn't stop I-70, but at least we're representing the health and the welfare of those folks. And I'm sure you'll talk about this and what things you were able to help them with and get. So I introduce Councilman Ortega. She is now in the last 2 years of her 12-year term this time. And she can tell us about all of her accomplishments. Thank you.
Awesome. Cindy, thank you so much for that introduction and for the invitation to join you here this evening. I just want to put in a plug that our longest serving member of City Council was Kathy Reynolds. And Councilman Flynn and I will both be doing a resolution that will actually be naming our chambers, which is where Kathy spent most of her time after Kathy Reynolds. And many of you probably know Kathy or knew her. She passed away last year, and her husband Rick is just elated that we will be doing that. So I will be the only other one that will match that record because now people can only serve 3 consecutive terms. And I'm the only one that has served in a district and was crazy enough to come back and serve again in an at-large capacity. And I did that because when I saw how much turnover we had seen, so when I left, 10 out of 13 of us left. So a lot of institutional knowledge of how the city has worked over time walked out the door. And so the voters, granted me that opportunity to come back. And has given me the opportunity to really continue to focus on some important issues for our city, affordable housing being right at the forefront. And I'll be able to talk a little bit later about a couple of other issues that I've been working on. One is local hire tied to all of our big construction projects, railroad safety, which is something very important to people who live next to rail that carries cargo, and then flavored tobacco ban that I'm working on with Councilwoman Sawyer. So I thought, I could give you a quick update on a couple of things that I know you all had some interest in, unless you wanted to jump into questions. So I'm not sure how you want to proceed. So I'll take your lead on that. Okay.
Councilman Ortega, if you give us the overview first,
Okay.
then I think we'll have a lot of questions.
That would be
And
great.
usually, okay, super, thanks.
Okay, so let me first talk a little bit about something that you touched on earlier, Cindy, and that's the Globeville, Elyria, Swansea neighborhoods, which people now refer to as the GES neighborhoods, just to make it short. As you know, those communities have experienced a lot of challenges over the years, and they're right in the front yard, if you will, of Suncor refinery. And I think you know that Suncor actually holds 2 clean air Title VI operating permits, and they must renew them every 5 years. And that gives the opportunity for the regulating agency to look at various issues, but they don't wait until that renewal timeframe to bring them in to address some issues. So as we know, they've had some malfunctions and some plant upsets. And in 2017, they had a malfunction that lasted for 6 minutes that released more than 600 pounds of hydrogen sulfide and hydrogen dioxide. And then in 2016, an incident releasing 75,000 pounds of sulfur dioxide. So CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, basically has taken, they reviewed those incidents and they took administrative actions for those serious incidents, and basically fined Suncor $9 million for air pollution violations. And sorry, I've got something on my screen I need to take off of there. So as part of that settlement, $2.6 million is going to fund community projects that includes the Commerce City community as well as the GES communities. And the communities picked 5 projects that they wanted to see funded. They also are required to provide air monitoring alarms and incident alerts. So when something happens, the neighborhoods are notified. And that's especially important because if the neighborhoods need to, close doors and windows, need to leave their neighborhood, those are things that helps ensure the health and the safety of the community is being protected as part of those notifications. They also receive water quality permits, and there are 2 permits that are up for renewal in 2021 that limits the pollution that they're allowed to put into Sand Creek, and they'll have public comments as part of that process when that opens up. So I wanted to just give an update on that. And then the other one that you all had mentioned you had some interest in is how the state legislation that was passed last session affects local government's ability to be able to address affordable housing. And what Denver is looking at is basically one-time fees that will be imposed on new developments that would look at the square footage of the development. And they're basically designed to offset the impact of the demand for affordable housing. And the intent is to increase the existing fee on commercial and low scale residential within the financial feasibility to increase funds for affordable housing. And then the other piece is something that we had in place, but we had removed that when the city adopted a designated fund for affordable housing. And that was our inclusionary housing ordinance. So we're going to go back to having inclusionary housing. And when the Telluride ruling was in place, we were able to utilize our inclusionary housing, but only for sale projects, not for rental. We were prohibited when the ruling came down from doing what was considered any form of rent control. That was under state jurisdiction. So the change in state law allows us now to look at creating various requirements that we would work with local developers on. And so that's basically what we're moving towards. There's a committee that has been meeting that is putting details to the work that is happening. And I'm assuming that at some point we'll have a new ordinance that creates the inclusionary housing ordinance that will guide how and when that will be imposed. But that will allow for especially big projects. I mean, we have seen some very large developments that have come before city council asking for zoning changes that will be pretty dense in scale. Couple examples are the River Mile project down along the South Platte River, basically where the Elitch site is. The what is being referred to as Fox, it's called Fox Park. This is the old Denver Post site that is at basically 43rd and Fox. And that will be coming before city council, asking for, some approvals that will include tax increment financing and basically utilizing some of the funding tools that developers can ask for in doing their developments. And when we have these large scale projects that will have an impact on infrastructure, not on site, but the off site impacts, more traffic on the roads, potentially more pollution. This is where the city can, ask them to include affordable housing in their projects. So I wanted to just cover those things very quickly. I could talk a little bit about some of the legislation that I'm working on right now. And one that I've been working on with Councilwoman Kinich is a local hire. And this is sort of a takeoff from work that I did on I-70, where we really pushed hard to make sure that people along that I-70 corridor would be given the opportunity to be hired and that they would be plugged into apprenticeship training opportunities. So the ability to take advantage of livable wage jobs. And in this case, we have a program called Work Now that basically was created at Community College of Denver. So it was intended not to sit within state government or local government, but rather to be a vehicle that could potentially be used for more than just the I-70 project. And Denver has been utilizing the Work Now program, ensuring that we are focusing on building out construction careers. It's something that we had been doing as a pilot program. Councilwoman Kenitra and I are working on an ordinance that will be brought forward that basically codifies that process and ensures that with any big projects, and the threshold level we've been using is $10 million, but there has been a push to encourage agencies that are doing projects that may fall under that threshold to also consider looking at the local hire component. And there was a lot of foundational work that went into creating that opportunity. We looked at the geography of our city and identified some key factors that ensured that if there's a legal challenge to this, that we have created that solid foundation for which we can move forward in doing this local hire program. Let me move on to the railroad safety issue. This is something I started working on in 2015. And going back to when I was a district council person, I served on our local emergency planning committee. Within my district, I had the mousetrap, which is where I-25 and I-70 intersect. And I don't know how many of you were around when we had an incident many, many years ago where there was a torpedo that was on the back of a vehicle that turned over, and it took hours and hours. This was on a work day, and it gridlocked traffic throughout our city, both on I-70 and I-25, because the fire department, the driver was injured, the fire department couldn't find the manifest papers and was trying to make sure that they were able to lift this vehicle without this. They didn't know if this was a live round or not, right? A live torpedo. So as a result of that, I have served on the city's local emergency planning committee and was very much involved in the shipment of the waste out of Rocky Flats that traveled down I-25, which is a hazmat corridor, and went down to Carlsbad, New Mexico. So fast forward to the build out of the Central Platte Valley, which was part of my district. It was part of District 9. And I was very involved going back to when Sal Carpio was the councilman that started planning the build out of the Central Platte Valley. And then I was on the council as the council person as we started seeing the implementation of all that work. And so it included bringing down, excuse me, the viaducts that connected North Denver to downtown, and basically opened up the floor of the Central Platte Valley for development. And that is almost completely filled in today. And as you know, our central, it's called the Central Main Line, the CML, runs right through the center of downtown. And as we have seen development come in, it has basically encroached right up to the tracks. That Central Main Line is a major corridor for moving freight traffic across the country. And it travels through and sometimes sits in the center of our city. We know that we've got many railroad storage lines not far from downtown, but this is an issue where we have had many residents who now live right next to these train tracks and sometimes see these tanker cars sit on the tracks for hours at a time. They have expressed concern about their safety and making sure that if they ever had to evacuate, they wanted us to ensure that we worked with our Office of Emergency Management and the fire department to look at evacuation routes. So there was a lot of work done through a committee that was created that was focused on how do we look at existing development that's next to rail, and how do we look at new development coming into our city? And with existing rail, it's working with the Office of Emergency Management to go in and work with the managers of the buildings. With new development, we basically said we're going to create a new checkoff box on the application process for anybody coming in to do development review, design review, or a rezoning application, and make sure that they get a copy of the report that came out of this work group that the mayor put together that was spearheaded by our fire chief, so that we can look at how the agencies can have input and the developer is going to address the safety of the people who will be in those properties that we're going to permit to build on these sites. We went back and looked at the data, seeing how many people had checked the box. I believe there were like 17 of them. And then we asked for the data on what kind of information did the agencies recommend and what kind of work did the developers do to address this issue? And there was no data. It was a voluntary program. So the upshot, what we learned was that we need to give the agencies the authority to regulate. And we're going through that process right now. I'm asking for $350,000 in this budget cycle for the 2022 budget, so that we can make sure that we have the funding to look at which methodology we want to use and ask developers to comply with. And the interesting thing in this process that we learned is that looking across the United States, we worked with the National League of Cities. The fire chief reached out to the association he was a part of with fire chiefs across the country to see what kind of standards did other cities have in place to look at and regulate development next to rail. We're not the only city that has light rail stops and cargo traffic that runs parallel to those where there's lots of new development coming in, right? There are no standards in the US. The only place we could find standards was in Canada. And so there were two different approaches that different Canadian cities looked at, and they worked with an organization equivalent to our National League of Cities to come up with standards. And so this process will allow us to look at all of that. So stay tuned. We'll keep you plugged into how that's going. And then I'm trying to keep track of time here. One very last one, and this is much shorter. Councilwoman Sawyer and I have both been working on bringing forward a flavored tobacco ban, and that's on all tobacco products. So that would include cigars, cigarettes, vapes, all of that. And we have had 2 public outreach sessions. They were done virtually. And then we also held one session with people who own various shops around the city of Denver of all types. And we're looking to bring that legislation forward in October to committee to have discussions with our colleagues. So those are a couple of the key things I wanted to touch on. As you know, we have a bond package that is moving forward that the mayor and city council put on the ballot for November. I saw that you all will be talking about that and any of the other issues that will be on the November ballot at your October 5th meeting. But the package of bond projects that the city moved forward is approximately a $400 million package. 190 of that is to the National Western campus that was anticipated and always planned as part of the master plan. And the city thought that they were going to be able to get a couple of those buildings done by a private sector entity, but things really kind of went by the wayside in the last year. Everybody was impacted financially because of COVID, and what they thought would materialize with a private sector developer did not happen. And so that's why those two buildings, the arena and the 1909 building, which is the oldest, most historical building, which is intended to be a public market. I don't know how many of you have been to Pike's Market in Seattle. Aaron, who was the executive director that ran that operation for many years, is the person that National Western consulted with to come and help us figure out what that needed to look like. And part of the message is it's got to be everything local. You can't put in your typical chains and all of that, because what makes them successful is the whole local flavor of foods, crafts, music, all of what you have seen at various public markets around the country. So just wanted to touch on those, and I'll stop now and see what other kinds of questions any of you may have for me.
So we do have some questions that have come in while you were speaking.
Okay.
Market sounds great. That'd
Yeah.
be fun, right? Councilwoman, in your experience, how does the GES community feel about the expansion of the stock show complex?
That's a good question. There is not a unified position. There are some folks who have been very vocal. It has primarily been a group called the GES Coalition, but it is not completely reflective of the entire community. There are some people who live in the community who have been part of it's a community advisory group to National Western, and basically some of them have come out in support of this. Many of them are part of what is called a community investment group that's looking at various funding sources from the operations that will be part of National Western. I think you may have heard a little bit about something referred to as the Roundup. That was only intended to be one of many options that could be considered. That was mentioned in the framework agreement that exists between National Western and the city. And that's the 3 partner agencies that make up the National Western Authority. And so basically, these 2 buildings will create even greater financial opportunities for the community. The 1909 building is intended to completely engage the community, and I have received a commitment from our finance director, and actually on our consent agenda just this week, we moved forward a request for $400,000 that will be used to begin the public engagement to look at how the community will be more involved in defining what could happen, not just at the 1909 building, but at the Coliseum property, because that was originally intended to be part of a private development in exchange for a developer building out these 2 buildings that are on this package. So I have been very supportive because I think the opportunities are greater if we move forward. My concern is if none of that moves forward, it's unknown what a next administration will do with this property and how much they will truly engage the community. And I know there is a commitment from the Hancock administration to ensure that the GES neighborhoods are very much a part of the conversations and helping shape what the community benefits will be out of the development at the convention, the Coliseum property, but also looking at input on other aspects of the National Western campus.
Okay, there's another question about the National Western campus, and then we'll go, there's a couple about affordable housing first, but will there be a festival park in the options for the stock show?
They're intending to have the National Western campus be a facility that is being utilized year round. And festivals has been very much a part of the master plan that has been talked about. Clearly, the 1909 building would lend itself to be part of that as well. You could fold festivals into the market. And I mean, the entrepreneurial opportunities alone that creates for the GES communities is one of the things I'm very excited about, because we have very talented people that live in these communities, and there should be these opportunities for them to benefit from this mega project in their neighborhood.
So the next couple of questions are about affordable housing. This first one seems hard, but maybe you know it really well. Are you able to put a dollar amount on affordable housing?
We're able to put a dollar amount on what it's costing us right now to not be serving people who are unhoused. And that's about a $46,000 figure for folks who are considered some of the frequent flyers that cycle through our hospital, our jail system, our courts. That was quantified, and the state has been a partner in this process as well in helping to identify some of the costs. So we can house people for a much cheaper price than that, even with the cost of housing that exists in our city today. The issue is, do we have enough of the affordable housing to house everybody? And that's where, in the time that I have served on council, we have never put more money than we have been putting into housing, affordable housing, and addressing our unhoused neighbors than we have in these last few years. During COVID, we have housed people at National Western, the Coliseum, and in motels. We still have people at the Coliseum and in motels. We also purchased some additional properties, including a motel, where we're looking to house additional individuals. The shelter is occupied on a nightly basis. It's being run by one of our service providers who work with the homeless community. And so I don't know that we could actually put a price tag on affordable housing, because it depends on what AMI level, area median income level, you're looking at targeting. And so our hope is that with some of these big developments, as we're working with them to include affordable housing, that we can try to create different price points. One of the challenges we have in our housing market is we've done a lot at the very low income level. We do a lot where, you know, somebody's coming in and asking for some of the financing tools, and typically that's at 80% of the area median income. And in the middle, we haven't done as much. And as people come out of programs, say somebody's in a transitional housing, it's a 2-year program, they come out, they're ready to get their own apartment. Those different price points of housing have not been part of the focus of ensuring that we have that spectrum of housing options for people who need it. And, you know, the other thing I think is important to mention is that we have a lot of, what's ironic is we have more people living on the streets. At the same time, we have more than we have been doing ever to address the needs of our unhoused community. And I don't believe that Denver should be the only community in the Front Range, in the metro area, solving this problem. It needs to be a regional collaboration approach. A couple of our neighbors, Aurora, for example, has Comitas Shelter on the Anschutz campus. A number of our other adjacent municipalities do not have shelters. Some of them may provide housing vouchers in motels, but by and large, we are the city that has the largest number of shelter facilities that house large numbers of people. And not everybody is attracted to them. And also, as you know, we have put city money into some of the safe open spaces, which are the outdoor structured sites. So we've got one right now on the Regis campus, and then we have one in the Park Hill neighborhood. And in the mayor's budget, they're looking at the possibility of trying to expand those in other neighborhoods across the city.
So is council considering preventing exclusionary single-family zoned housing as other cities have done?
Not to my knowledge. Part of the challenge is we don't have a lot of open space to be building more single-family homes. And as you know, one of the things we're seeing are single-family structures being removed and replaced where the zoning exists with 2 units that take up the entire lot. I live in a neighborhood. I've got 3 projects going all around me within 500 feet in each direction where that's happening. I haven't seen anything that is prohibiting single family structures, but I think to some degree, a lot of this is being market driven in terms of where people are willing to sell. And I can't tell you how often I get notices on my door, in my mail, and even phone calls, text messages from people wanting to buy my home. And, you know, if I was a willing seller, they'd probably try to scrape my home. I think it'd be a little harder because I live in an older home, and they'd probably have a historic challenge. So I hope that answered your question.
So another quick one about affordable housing, and then we'll move on to something else. What's the average percent of developer projects that include 30% AMI affordable housing?
Those are typically being done by our nonprofit housing development organizations. Del Norte, which is the organization I'm a part of, a number of their projects have, and not all of these projects that have 30% of the AMI include 100% of the units at that range. Typically, it's a blend. Many of Del Norte's projects have included 50 and 60% of the AMI, but have also included a good percentage of the units at 30%. But it's been primarily our nonprofit organizations. The Colorado Coalition for the Homeless has done a number of projects across our city. We've got a number of really good housing organizations that have been committed to ensuring that we have truly affordable housing for people who really need it at the lowest income levels.
So there was a question that I like a lot. As Denver has grown in size and complexity, how have you seen the role of city council change? Sort of a review of your time in the council, right?
One of the areas where I've seen council's role be really critical in changing the direction and the impact in the budget is around the fact that people want to see us become more of a walkable, bikeable city. And you see more and more everywhere you go, bike lanes being built out and ensuring that we have safe corridors for people who want to commute to work or you know, for recreational purposes. I particularly prefer riding on the trails. I just think they're much safer. But as a city council was the first, when I first came back in 2011, there were a lot of bike advocates, and I'm a biker. I'm recovering from a knee replacement, and my goal has been to try to get back on my bike before the end of the summer. I'm not quite there yet, but you know, we have a very, very active and strong biking community in our city. And it not only benefits people who live in Denver, because a lot of folks who live in neighboring jurisdictions commute into Denver. And it's much better for air quality if people are doing that. Now, I think it's a little harder to do in the winter when it snows, right? But we have good weather a good majority of the time as well. And it may be chilly to ride your bike in the winter, but if it's not snowing, it's, many people still ride their bikes. So that's one area. Obviously, the issue around housing and the kind of money that has been put into housing is another one where council has been huge in addressing that. Another area is around legal representation for people who are experiencing evictions. And city council actually started this by all of us taking money from our budgets and creating a fund to start this. And the administration has continued to fund that. Around the issue of parks and open space and a commitment to parks, as you know, city council put on the ballot to create a fund to ensure that as we grow as a city, we're also adding more open space and not just expecting the developer to do 10% on their property, but ensuring that we've got more big and regional parks across our city. So those are just a few examples. I could probably name a number of others, but for the sake of time and the fact that you probably have other questions, I'll stop there.
Here's another sort of general one that just came in. Has the pandemic radically changed any way that the city council reacts to citizen input or citizens giving their opinions, or how procedures might be more efficient? Sort of the big question for all of us, right? Pre and post.
Interestingly, Councilman Cashman, right before the pandemic hit, was really encouraging that we look at having public comment as part of all of our council meetings. And we have incorporated that into both the committee process as well as our Monday night meeting. And I think you all know that, every Monday night at 5 o'clock before our council meeting starts, we have 30 minutes of public comment. It's not unusual to have a lot of the same people come back every Monday night, but often we have many different people come that raise varying issues as well. And so during the pandemic, it gave us the opportunity to hear what some of the issues were that communities were struggling with. One area where I think during the pandemic where we made huge strides was around using the fund that was supported by the voters, the Healthy Food for Denver Kids, to ensure that many of our families had food, because a lot of families their jobs were impacted. And it's alarming to know how many families we've had to help serve. Some of that money we provided to Denver Public Schools, who was distributing food right at the schools, making it easy and convenient for families to pick up the food. We've worked with many of our food banks and others. So there are so many different areas where the city utilized the federal dollars to really dig in deep and to go where the greatest need was.
So a question back to your rail issues. What type of materials does the rail transfer that might be hazardous to the Denver population? Do they have to notify a department in Denver when traveling through Denver?
They provide information to the state, and then our Office of Emergency Management can obtain that data from the state. So just some examples. I mean, a lot of it is petroleum products that are moving across the country. We have many businesses in the city who rely on some of the varying products, in the whole water treatment process. Denver Water is one of the places where certain chemicals get dropped off that is part of the purification process. We have just varying types of businesses that utilize and often store, larger amounts of various products. And so it's a mix of materials, but the largest one and the biggest concern is from the flammable liquids. And that's not to minimize the impact that some of those other products might have as well, but flammable liquids tends to be, if you've ever seen a train coming through our city, you will see, blocks and blocks and blocks of these tanker cars that carry petroleum products all on one train. And so the concern is, how do we ensure that we protect our communities? There's been a lot of work done on the railroad administration part to change out the tanker cars. The older ones have over time, they're making them replace them to ensure that we don't have rusty tanker cars that might be leaking some of these products. And in the city of Denver, I think the fact that they travel through what is referred to as a high urban traffic area means they have to lower their speed when they travel through our city. But the fact that sometimes they sit in the center of our city and stage there while they're moving train cars around in the rail yards, that's where it's concerning, because, today we have to be concerned about any kind of, what's the word I want to use? Anybody who has bad intentions. Don't want to use the word terrorist, but basically we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can as a city, working with our railroad community, who we have no jurisdiction over. We only have control of the land use process where people are building next to rail. And that's where we're trying to address the safety of the communities that are being placed within a close proximity to these rail lines.
I certainly remember the torpedo issue, so I'm glad you're on this topic of our safety. Here's a question. Was council aware of the $32,000 the city paid for assessment of the plausibility of a grocery store in the Park Hill Golf Course land?
I'm not aware of that. I don't know if any of my other colleagues are. I have not been part of the ongoing meetings that have been held over time on the Park Hill Golf Course. There's so much else to be doing that until something is actually filed to come before city council. I have not sat through all of those meetings. And there's lots of different issues associated with that particular parcel of land, which is not city owned. It's not a city golf course.
Another question on affordable housing. Would Dr. Cog be the regional coordinator for other areas to provide affordable housing? It does seem like a good idea to have shelters outside of Denver proper, right? And what about mental and behavioral health facilities to increase help for the people on the streets?
All of that's really important. And a lot of those things we're working to address in our budget presentations that we started receiving this week. And we've got agencies that will come before us next week as well. Many agencies are focused on putting money in their budget to address behavioral and mental health issues, substance abuse as well. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the first part of the question.
Dr. Cog.
So we have a different vehicle called the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative. MDHI is the continuum of care vehicle for the 7-county region designated by HUD that works with providing funding for housing projects that provide the support services to people who are at the lowest income levels that we're getting into housing that have been formerly unhoused. And I'm not sure what role Dr. Cog would play in that. I mean, obviously, being part of a regional conversation might be helpful, but I think it's more working with the continuum of care vehicle. In this case, it's the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative as well as the neighboring elected officials who control the dollars from their jurisdiction that might be willing to cost share a facility that may be located in one of their jurisdictions, for example.
So we have one more question, and then I suppose we could open it up if someone wanted to unmute. The last one we have is, now that the city is well on its way to being developed, what other areas in the city need to be developed and land utilized to its highest use? So it's sort of a summary, I guess, on where the city's going.
Yeah, I have raised an issue with the planning department. I actually used funding from my budget to hire someone to help look at some of the projects that run along the I-25 corridor. And that includes the parcel that I mentioned earlier at the Denver Post site. As you know, we have the possibility of seeing the Coliseum site developed. We just learned this year that the Pepsi plant will be moving right down at 38th and Brighton Boulevard. That is equivalent to the same size as the Coliseum, right next door. So, and the zoning in the Rhino neighborhood, which is this is referred to as along the Brighton corridor, Brighton Boulevard, can allow up to 8 stories. I'd have to go back and look to see if this particular property was included in that rezoning, meaning the Pepsi-Cola plant site. But along the I-25 corridor, you've got the River Mile, which is the Elitch site. The Denver Broncos have proposed wanting to see, or it's actually the Stadium District, see their south parking lots developed. And then as you go a little further down along the corridor, as you all know, the Burnham Yards has been vacated. This is railroad land, not unlike the Central Platte Valley, which used to all be railroad land. It's all now filled in with lots of housing. That's about 70 acres. And then as you go a little further, you're the potential for the what is known as the Alameda and Broadway area. It's the old Broadway Marketplace. And then you go a little further south, you've got the Design Center. All of that is about the size of Lower Downtown or Cherry Creek. So much of that is being developed right now. If you've driven along Alameda, you see where the old Kmart used to be. That has a structure that is being built. And then, you know, along the Santa Fe corridor, you see land being, you know, property being built. So I forgot the Gates site, but that's along that same corridor where many of these sites are adjacent to the rail stops. And that's where you're seeing some of the high density projects wanting to be developed. And then the very last one, which is way south, it's the Loretta Heights site in Councilman Flynn's district. And that community has been through a very lengthy process that has done the rezoning on it. And they've been moving forward on the financing. And I think it won't be long before you start seeing some construction on that site. So those are some of the major parcels that are close to the core city where there's potential development. But my reach to the planning department was to, and the transportation department was to ask, who's looking at the cumulative impact on the adjacent neighborhoods and to the existing infrastructure, water lines, sewer, roads, you know, all of that, to ensure that we're not overtaxing those that infrastructure, and that somebody is looking at it more holistically as opposed to each development separately and only looking at what's going on site. We have to look at that cumulative impact, especially along the corridor, because I-25 is already jammed. Federal Boulevard is a corridor that much of this runs along Spear Boulevard, you know, so we have to figure out how do we address these. And interestingly, the Denver Post site, which is the Fox Park project, we had seen a lot of projects coming forward to city council for rezoning in that area, all of which were, asking for the maximum density according to the plan that was done back, when Councilwoman Judy Montero was the councilwoman. That's 2 council people ago, right? Before Councilwoman Sedibaka was elected. In that area, I kept asking, wait a minute, you can't keep bringing all these rezoning applications without looking at the infrastructure. We have one major road into that site, and that comes off of Park Avenue, goes under I-25 and crosses at Fox, and it intersects with an on and off ramp trying to get onto I-25. And then it also dips into 38th Avenue. And it's congested today. So when you start adding all of that traffic, we have to look at the cumulative impact of all the development in that area. So to the city's credit, the Public Works, now known as DOTI, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, went back and looked at how much development had been approved, the density, the potential volume of what could be there. And what they go back and do is equate it to how many cars can each project have. And so what they've looked at now is a traffic demand management approach that caps the number of trips that can come into the area. And it's basically based on, whoever gets their permits first, or how many trips have been allocated to the various projects. And then the city engaged all of the property owners down there in a conversation about if they want more trips into the area, then there has to be a push to do a different access point. And what they've talked about is a roadway connection over the railroad tracks to the Sunnyside neighborhood. And I said, you can't count the little tiny 2-lane road that goes over the highway and into the Globeville neighborhood. Those folks are already dealing with enough in their neighborhoods. They don't need traffic trying to get to the Fox area to exacerbate what they're dealing with. So it's my understanding that the developer who has been working on the Fox Park project, the old Denver Post site, has been asked to do that connection over the tracks. I have no idea what that's going to cost, but that project alone, or that project meaning the roadway connection, then opens up the opportunity for more trips into the area. I don't know how that changes the number that they had originally set as, as the cap. So stay tuned. That may be excuse me, more of an approach they look at along the I-25 corridor where all these other projects are. But we'll see as the city continues to look at how they're working to address the cumulative impact issue.
So sort of related to that is the city looking at making communities more sustainable? And is there enough water for all this new growth, right, from Denver Water?
I mean, that again, that was part of my request in looking at the infrastructure. It's not just the physical lines that run through our city, but it's the capacity, right? Do our roads have the capacity to handle the increased volume? Do our sewer and water lines have the capacity to handle an increase? I mean, with Excel, when they see there's a capacity issue, they can just go build another substation somewhere, right? But it's not as easy when you're dealing with some of these other infrastructure components. So yeah, I mean, that's been part of the request to look at the big picture of what we're seeing that has been applied for. Now, whether we see it all come to fruition. You know, I think COVID has had a huge impact on a lot of things. You know, the finances of some of these developers who maybe were hoping to get a bank loan to come and do this. But we'll just have to see whether all of this becomes a reality.
So I wanted to check in with you on time. It's almost 6:40. Do you have time for a couple more questions, or should I send it?
I've got 5 more minutes.
Then I will send
So,
it to Cindy because to finish.
okay,
Thank you so much for answering all these questions.
sure, happy to do it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. What we would like to do is honor you for all of your years. And I haven't heard from Susan yet if it's possible with the ethics code to give you a membership. She was saying it wasn't possibly, but
We all vote for it.
yeah. If we could at least send you some flowers to make your days brighter, because I know you're coming in every day along with Susan to your office. We appreciate that. We know you prioritize accessibility for everyone. So thank you so much. We appreciate all your hard work. We don't always get to hear all about it, so this gave us an opportunity. But
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Councilwoman Ortega. Yeah, you are welcome. So,
What an
Perlan,
honor.
would you like
Thank
me to
you.
close out the evening?
Yes, that'd be great, Cindy.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. And if you ever have any questions, answer this one last question for us, Councilman Ortega. Do you like emails or do you like phone calls?
I do both. I think the personal contact is really important. You
Yeah.
can't hear the inflection, the voice inflection through email the same way you can when you're having a phone conversation. And I think it's a lot more personal when you can talk to a person than just trying to deal with people via email.
I wanted to second that because Susan is one of the few people that I call a council office and somebody answers. Thank you. It's fantastic. And then also, I just wanted one last comment that Susan told me that I think is pretty neat. You know, through all the trials and tribulations of the many, many years with I-70, Susan told me there's one bright spot that's very, very nice. She said she went down there the other day and walked up to that little area in front of the Swansea School that's over I-70 that is going to become a park, and they're starting to build a building there. She said the neighborhood could actually see the mountains now from GES area. So there's always a glimmer of hope somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all for
I
coming.
have a
and we'll-
comment. I have a comment. This is Fran.
Sure.
Sorry, everyone. I had to come on late because I had another meeting, but hi, Debbie. It's good to see you.
Hi, Fran. How are you?
Good. I was just talking to your office yesterday because I sit on the same committee as Jack does. And I want to thank you very much for his participation on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, because he has been a really great asset for me. And I've learned a lot about Parks and Rec. And I know as you go off, we'll lose Jack, but I have to compliment you on the choice you made there.
Thank you. Most people don't know this, but excuse me. I always think it's important to hire people that are smarter than you, right? So, 2 of my staff people are attorneys by background, and during the I-70 process, we all took sections of the final EIS and plowed through it and made 40 pages of comments to the Department of Transportation on mitigation measures that we thought were critical for the GES neighborhoods. Most of those were adopted. So I think that's a lot of it was focused on the homes. We pushed for trees, the air quality monitoring. There were lots of things that we thought were critical. And Jack and Susan played a pivotal role in helping make sure that we came up with that comprehensive list. So I have to give credit to my staff as well for their dedication and work to the people of our city over these years that they have worked with me. And Susan and Jack have been a couple of our longest serving council aides that have been working with the city.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you again so much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.